I self-published my first poetry book, Back to Earth, a few months ago, and it was a process that I had to learn a lot on the go and mostly by myself because honestly I didn't find that much useful information online on how to write a poetry book step by step. So if you are planning writing a book, if you're already in the process of writing a poetry book, today I'm going to share more about my experience, my learnings, and the things that I wish I knew back then, and hopefully this will be helpful for you too. First of all, it's important to understand that there are different stages of writing a poetry book or really any book. The first stage is concept. This is when you develop your book idea. You're going to answer questions such as, what is the main theme of my book? What is my book about? You're also going to understand, why am I writing this book? How is this going to benefit the life of someone and also my own? The second stage is writing. To me, writing and living, they go hand in hand. This is a time for you to sit down and go through the painful process of giving birth to a creation. This is a time for you to embark on a journey of self-exploration to connect with your creative power. The third stage is publishing and distribution. Here you're going to decide, do I want to self-publish this book or do I want to find a publisher? What about distribution? Are you thinking about Amazon? Maybe you want to print your own book, or maybe you just want to have an ebook or Kindle version of it. Or maybe you also want to have your book on bookshelves around the world, or maybe just a few countries. There are so many questions around distribution and publishing. And now the fourth stage is about marketing and promotion. This is the time that your book is no longer your book. Now your book belongs to the world. This is a time for you to share and spread your message and your creation. Now, for the sake of keeping this video short, I am going to focus on the two first stages, concepts and writing a book. If you want to learn more about how to publish a book, how to promote your book, let me know and I'll do a video about it. So let's start with developing the idea of your book. Even though the concept of the book is the first stage, I want you to know that this is not necessarily a linear process. For example, I started writing my book because it's based on my journaling practice before I even had the idea of writing a book. So that insight that this work and this story should be published only came later. The concept of the book is the glue that connects the different parts of your book together. It is what it makes it coherent, and it can be a story. It can be a collection of different poems about different subjects, as long as there is a common theme. So let me give you a couple of examples. My book, Back to Earth, is about personal transformation. This is a book about undertaking the journey from loss and heartache to reclaim one's truth and sovereignty. There is actually a story from beginning to end. I also have this book by Leonard Cohen, which is a collection of poems and songs written throughout his career, like a best of. There is also this book by Young Pueblo, which is called Clarity and Connection, and this is a book about understanding how past wounds impact our present relationships. At the end of the day, the theme of your book is the invitation for someone to choose to read your book. It is the driving motivation that will resonate with your audience's heart. And when you're developing the idea of your book, I find it crucial that you focus on understanding what is the purpose. Because writing a book, it takes work internally and externally. It will stir emotions. It's going to be a great investment of your time and your energy. You'll probably have to say no to something in order for you to say yes to your book. Your purpose is going to be the anchor that keeps you grounded throughout the process. There will be times of self-doubt. There will be times that you're wondering if you actually should write the book, because trust me, your mind will try to convince you 1,000 times why you shouldn't write and publish this book. Also, a purpose connects you with a higher power. It is the awareness that this work is beyond yourself. Because writing a book, it is a gift, it is a form of service, it is a part of your legacy, and it has the potential to touch someone else's life. So, what is your purpose? To me, I had two main purposes with writing my book. The first one is because I needed to go through those emotions and to find a narrative for the story and the place that I was in. And the second reason is because I felt very lonely in that time of my life and the experience that I was having. And it was written mostly during the pandemic, so I was in lockdown. And also because this is a topic, and by this I mean mental health and women's reproductive rights. This is a topic that I feel we still don't talk about it enough, because there is so much still shame around it that it makes it a taboo. And so by writing this book, I was hoping that someone who has gone through a similar experience, who is at the moment or who will find some comfort in knowing that someone else has gone through a similar journey. Okay, so let's go now to the second stage of writing a book, which is the writing process. Usually the main roadblocks about writing a book is resistance, which often comes from fear and lack of self-belief when it comes to how to write a book, the technical part, and also the content. And another roadblock is lack of inspiration. So here are 5 tips on writing poetry book. So the first tip is to live your life, because if you want to create a meaningful book, then I would recommend you to create first a meaningful life. And by meaningful, I don't mean necessarily to be interesting on the outside externally, but this is about cultivating your inner world. Again, journal, reflect on your experiences, understand what you are feeling, because ultimately, to me, writing is an act of expressing what it's like to be human. So embrace your imperfections, embrace your stories, and turn your life into a piece of art. I had this realization as I was writing my book. I actually even have a poem about that says, inspiration won't strike by luck. You need to go out and live. Life is your first masterpiece. Because what happened is that at the end of the book, I thought my life would go in a way, but then it was just an empty chapter. So this is when I decided to travel and create the last chapter of my book. So it was totally written on the go. I had no idea what would it be about. The second tip is to read a lot, not necessarily just for inspiration, but to enrich your inner world. There is this quote that says, "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies." The third tip is for you to experiment with different formats. For example, I started writing mostly in poetry when I was writing my book, and then by chapter 2, I was like, actually, I'm feeling that I need to experiment with different formats. And I realized that writing prose in long formats would help me to convey my messages and my emotions much better. And remember that the only limit is you. The fourth tip is for you to stop waiting for inspiration to come and instead create a routine around your writing time. You should treat your writing time as sacred time. So sit with the intention to write, and write even if you don't use it later. Your job, mostly as a writer, is just going to be to write and not necessarily to judge your creations. And this is also written in my book, because at the end of the book, I started questioning if this was good enough. I'm also quite of a perfectionist, and so I have it in my book. It's not up to you to judge your creations. You only have to show up. the value is subjective. It's called keep going. Because I believe that so much of art and creation, it can be subjective, and that our role as artists is to show up and to keep creating regardless of what other people are going to think. And the last tip for writing a poetry book is for you to have an accountability partner. For example, I started putting pressure on myself by telling people that I'm writing a poetry book. And so there is this social pressure, it's like now I can't just give up, right? And then I had also a designer, a friend of mine, Roxy, who did the incredible illustrations of this book. And we had weekly calls for over a year. And if it wasn't for that accountability, most likely this book wouldn't be published. So let's talk about structuring your book. I understand that this can be a struggle because the process of giving birth often comes from chaos. And for example, in my journey of writing my poetry book, it started on my journal, and then I would write on my phone, and then I would be in a coffee shop, and then I'll write on a napkin. So I had content all over the place, but it was really important for me to have one place where I would have all of those notes and content. And that was as simple as a Google Doc. And also this was the Google Doc that then I sent to my editors to proofread my book. Also, another recommendation is that proofreading is always, of course, important, editing, but I wouldn't show your work, especially if this is the first time that you're writing a book, very early on, because it may create a bias when it comes to the process. First of all, you may think that what you're writing is not enough, and second, you may start writing more for others than for yourself. When it comes to understanding what poems put where in your book, I structured my book based on my stories. So there are 4 chapters, which again connects with the main theme, which is personal transformation. The first chapter is falling, the second is sitting, the third is rooting, and then the fourth is sprouting. And it took me weeks to really structure my book properly, and I was changing things all the time. So what worked for me was to print the pages of the book, place them on the floor, and then start organizing them like a puzzle. Now, when it comes to understand what poems to include and what poems to exclude, it really depends on your narrative. For example, the book that I have, it has illustrations, so I had to take that into consideration. So think about the flow of the book and how one poem connects to the next one, if at all. It's your choice. People often ask me as well, how long did it take for you to write the book? So it's very subjective. For me, I received the idea of publishing this book and continued to write this book. This was October of 2020, and then it took 9 months for me to actually have the courage to start writing the book, review my journals, and start putting things together. So actually, the first chapter of my book, it's straight from my journals, and then the rest of the 3 chapters, then they were written on the go, and that it took me about 1 year. So total process between the idea and being published, this was around 2 years for me to write this book, which, well, again, it's subjective. There are people who take more years in their different books. No one involves research and so on. So have your own journey. You have your own timeline. And while we always seek for comparison because we think that it may give us a right or wrong direction, remember that it is your timeline. Whatever is your timeline, it is what's supposed to be. Concluding, there are so many things that I could say about writing a book and a poetry book. It even crossed my mind to do a course on this because there are even different stages in each stage of writing a book. So let me know, what would you like to ask? What would you like to learn if this is a topic that you're interested in? And I will see you next week.